Welcome to Legendary Upside Podcast. My name is Pat Kyren. Today I am joined by Daniel Racz and Kyle Dvorchak, and we are talking about rankings, big board rankings for Underdog's big board tournament. I did not want to be talking about 2024 season-long rankings this early. We're recording this on the Sunday before the Super Bowl. I'm gonna put it out on Monday to coincide with the launch of these rankings. But yeah, it's the Super Bowl is still a week away, and we're already talking about 2024. This is what Underdog has done to us this year, but didn't want to leave all the subscribers hanging. So got the rankings out there. We've been drafting off of them. We've been tweaking them. Feeling pretty good about the rankings. Had to do a ton of condensed rookie research. We're going to dive into the rookies in a big way in this podcast to talk about where we have all of them ranked, some of our biggest stances, some of our biggest fades. But before we do that, guys, how you doing?
Doing great. Nothing I'd rather do on February 4th than talk 2024 basketball. Gone are the days of betting on Pro Bowl DFS and just printing money and into the
Rest in power, King. Rest in power, King. Daniel, aren't you in like Europe or something? You're traveling and have graciously taken the time to degenerately talk about basketball.
When I planned a weekend trip to the Netherlands and Amsterdam, the thing I really want to do is just talk about 2024 basketball. So I couldn't be happier.
I didn't know you were in the Netherlands. Oh man,
I have another day here, so life is good. Can't complain.
Okay. Kyle, how you been? You're at least in your normal apartment, right?
I am in my normal apartment, though I did just get back from a trip to the mountains, so I'm not that far from Daniel, but it's impressive. Mid vacation. At least I ended mine and immediately was like, all right, let's get back to gambling, folks.
So we have these rankings, which I'll pull up now. The top guy on the list, Christian McCaffrey, not going to surprise anyone. And I would say in general, we are pretty close to ADP in this column here. You can see the difference from ADP. Not a ton of differences in the first round. This is how we played it in Best Ball Mania and how I would generally prefer to play it because, that you get kind of one opportunity to get these guys. And, I think if you're having a portfolio approach to this tournament or to any of these tournaments, it's nice to have exposure to all the first round guys, provided that it's at least somewhat efficient. And I think that it is. Like, I was honestly pleasantly surprised because I don't necessarily want to be taking huge stances in round one, that my rankings aligned with like the first draft that I put together aligned with the ADP like pretty nicely. So, I mean, I guess you would expect that. These are all the kind of clear top names here.
Yeah, these are the easy ones. We kind of expect the market to get them relatively right. Our big stances, you don't have to wait too long to get some big stances, but they don't come quite this early.
Yep. I would say the first guy that I start to get a little bit queasy about is Kyren Williams. He is, we have him 1.3 picks behind ADP, which, isn't crazy, but as I said, we would kind of like to be with the market here. That's the first place we get off with the market. And then the Devon Achane, we're bullish on. And I have them in the pure ranking. And as a reminder, or if you're unfamiliar with the rankings process, there's a pure ranking, which is not designed to be like the real ranking. I've had people ask, like, just give us the pure ranking. Like, the pure ranking is designed to be cut with ADP and produce an actionable rank. And occasionally the pure ranking is like, I'm in there doing stuff where I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna bump this guy up above this other guy because like I like him, but I know that it won't matter. And then Daniel and Kyle are like, why do we have this guy ranked so high? So they're not like designed. They're truly not designed to be drafted.
Yeah, the pure ranks are meant to work exclusively in tandem with formulas we have to have it interact with the market, the way people are feeling. They're not even how we truly feel about players in a sense, because like we know exactly the result that will happen when it interacts with the market in the sense of like we have some respect for the market and we know how that interaction works when we're working within the spreadsheets. So like we're in our mind saying like, I know this number will produce this outcome, and that's the outcome I roughly want.
Right. So anyway, we've got the kind of the pre-cut with ADP ranking. In that ranking, Kyren Williams is at 13 and Achane is at 14 for me. And that's actually how it spits out. So you guys are seeing in this case, the ADP is not cutting it enough. Not enough. You're seeing it's not hiding what we have behind the scenes is what I'm trying to say. So this is maybe the first spot where we're taking any kind of stand. We're a little bit behind on Kyren, a little bit ahead on Achane. You guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I remember that a few weeks ago in January, we were talking about where we thought early ADP set up and how Kyren was probably projecting to be one of the easier fades, with us thinking he'd be somewhere between 7 and 10 by ADP. And we thought, yeah, that's probably wrong. He should probably be closer to the 1-2 turn, but ideally an early second round pick. And lo and behold, the market, to its credit, early by ADP at 11.7, it's barely rich, but to the point that I can't argue it much. Kyle, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm probably fine. I don't even know if I feel it's that rich. Like Kyren graded out really well, not elite, but really well in the rushing metrics. I think the thing that Pat's like running back model is going to downgrade him in is his pass catching work, which like, yeah, he's not really a special pass catcher, and he doesn't see a ton of pass catching.
He actually comes out as bad as a pass catcher, like yards per route run. You look at, he's just, So that is a bit of a concern purely from a what can this guy do well perspective.
But from like a holistic sense, his role last year was, it was literally like in terms of expected fantasy points, it was just second to McCaffrey. He was that good in terms of how much he was used, whether it came from passing or rushing.
No one was challenging him for passing stuff.
No one was challenging for passing stuff. No one was challenging for goal line work. They used him in an elite role at the goal line, and the offense was, honestly, the offense looked like better than it did in the Super Bowl run this past year. Like adding Puka and made it look significantly better, in my opinion. The big sweat is that if we see Stafford start to fall off again, which he appeared to do 2 years ago, even when Kupp and him were healthy, he did not look great. Or the other threat would be, do they add a running back that can just take some work away? Because he's not special. I think he's good between the tackles. And like you said, he's nothing really to write home about as a pass catcher. He was a good pass catcher in college, but like we have NFL data saying that maybe that's not so accurate. But the role as a whole is, it's the second best in the NFL. It was last year, at least.
Yeah. The entire thesis with Kyren being a fine player in the best role, you'd ideally like to wait till after free agency and the draft to load up on that player. Because if the thesis is about the role and the two places where his role can get severely threatened come in the next few months, and it's tough for me to see his ADP climbing more than to 10 or 11. I think there's almost no chance he jumps Gibbs or Robinson. It's probably a player I'd like to be a little lighter on pre-draft than my total portfolio, because we'll either get some information that plausibly can only lower his ADP or keep it the same, but with the information that they didn't use significant capital to add competition.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like if we were sitting here in August and, they're resting Kyren with the starters, obviously, and, it's like there's really no one behind him, then I think we probably have him up from here a little. But there's a long way to go before then. And, this was a guy that was going undrafted in a lot of best ball leagues. Like he did get all the work and everything, and he is good, but I don't think he's like a special running back. I think he's kind of in that like Josh Jacobs style mold where he does everything pretty well. If you want to give this guy all the work, he's going to, be an awesome fantasy asset. Mm-hmm. But there are reasons why you might not want to, as an NFL franchise, just like load this guy up with everything. I also think the thing with Kyren that concerns me, even if this was August, is that like if Achane gets 12 touches, I'm like, awesome. That's what I signed up for. Mm-hmm. If Kyren gets 12 touches, I'm screwed. Sure, he can get there on touchdowns. He has such high touchdown equity, but like the scenarios where he's getting 12 touches, it's like I'm worried about what that means about his goal line work. I just think he's not, you wouldn't have been screwed at his old ADP, but if you're drafting him at the 1-2 turn and he's getting like 12 touches, maybe because he had a hamstring thing and they're trying, so it's just like he's more fragile in the sense that, like, because I think that this also goes to the receiving element, because he's not like a special receiving player. There's not scenarios where like they just kind of are mixing him in while he's like fighting through an injury. Like, obviously McCaffrey is McCaffrey, but part of the reason why he's so awesome is that were he to be nursing something and be on the field for only half of his normal snaps, he'd still be a pretty awesome fantasy back because of that receiving ability. So anyway, that's one reason I just get nervous about paying full price for Kyren. But with these rankings, you'll still get a fair amount of them.
Mm-hmm. Do we want to go on to Devon Achane now and why we're pretty bullish on him?
Yeah. Why are we high on Achane?
Okay. I have one nice stat that I think illustrates just how special a rookie season we had. If we look at all rookie running backs since 2000 to record at least 5.5 yards per carry and 10 touchdowns, so pretty lofty, but then again, Achane had 7.8 yards per carry, and if you were to look at 6.5 yards per carry, you're not finding any historical.
There's no one there.
Because it has never been done, but 5.5 yards per carry, at least 10 total touchdowns. 2017, Alvin Kamara. 2007, Adrian Peterson. 2006, Maurice Jones-Drew. 2002, Clinton Portis. Pretty good, as Larry David would say. That's a group you would probably want to be in on at almost any ADP. And that feels like the player that if we're trying to then already think of 2025 ADP, could be a top 3-5 pick.
Yeah, I mean, he's like a major candidate to be an early part of the first round pick in 2025. He's just so efficient.
Do you think he has a decent path to like he can't? The thing is, can he see more than 12 carries? Like, I do think he probably succeeds on 12 carries. We know, like, I was gonna say we've seen him do it before in games. We also saw him not play a bunch of games as a rookie because of his workload, as in that's what got him hurt. The touches are what eventually got him hurt. And guys who don't see the ball a lot tend to not. He's going to be a historical outlier, but like, can he continue to be such a historical outlier in the one sense of being as efficient as he was, or in a different sense of, let's assume he's not going to be the most efficient running back in the history of the NFL again, even if he is up there. If he doesn't do that, we probably need some more touches. And there are almost no running backs as light as he is to ever see as many touches.
Yeah, he's never going to be a workhorse. And we're like Mike McDaniel to get fired, I would panic. But, this is not a dynasty take. This is a season-long take. And, McDaniel's pretty safe. So for this year. So, yeah, I mean, I think if I'm like getting the 12 touches, 15 touches would be pretty sweet, but maybe we don't get quite there. I do think that he can be extremely efficient because of the scheme, because of like he is super talented, even though he is lightweight. He's like a traditional running back in sort of skill set as well. He's not just like a scat back type. Mm-hmm. So, you also have the potential for them to add a back, which is a little concerning, but less concerning given that we're already kind of making a bet on a player who's not going to have a ton of touches. And then, there's a chance that he's just sharing the backfield with Mostert as well, who's like 30, going on 32, I think.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's definitely like it's a weird pick. He's such a strange archetype. It's not. Yeah. This is normally a guy that
he's not an archetype as a thing. There's never been.
He's not an archetype.
There's never been one. He's literally the most efficient yards per carry back in the history of the NFL on 100 carries already. I believe. I think the only guys who have ever come close are like Michael Vick, Lamar Jackson type players. And in terms of like the fantasy bet, since 2000, one player at his weight has had 200 touches in a season, which is not a ton of touches. It was Warwick Dunn who did it like 8 freaking times. He did so many times, but no one else has ever looked like him in good ways and in bad. And that makes it a really weird bet to place. But like, I wrote him up. I was just writing about the rookie class and I was like, at the end of the day, if we know someone's like a superstar level talent, I'm willing to let a lot of the rest of the stuff figure itself out. And like, given how good he was as a rookie, like I'm pretty scared when I draft a 188-pound back in the first round, roughly in the first, he's just outside of the first round. But when he's that good, man, you can only be so scared.
Well put.
Yeah, and I do think like this tournament, it's the same tournament we always talk about with the underdog stuff, where this is actually 3 out of 12 advance in round 1, and then it's 1 out of 10, 1 out of 10 through week 15 and 16, and then it's a 558 person final, I think. So this is, I think, even like in a weird way, like more than Best Ball Mania, because the final's bigger. It's easier to advance through all 3 rounds to get to the final. What are you drafting? You're drafting a week 17 single week lineup. That is what this tournament is. It's a single week that you're looking to score points in. You have to get there. You have to qualify to have the chance for those points to matter. But Achane as a single week bet is, I think, extremely enticing. Because it's like a robust bet. Like he can get there on limited touches. If we're wrong and he gets more touches than any of us expect, like, oh man, and how do you feel? Like I had Achane on some week 17 final rosters this year. He didn't do much, but I felt really good heading into that week, and I would run that back. Like I want a guy like Achane with his massive ceiling, the kind of like you had to have it. He can access that you had to have it kind of scoring. So that's, I think, one reason to be high on him as well. Let's go to some of the other, we can be a little bit more rapid fire, I would say, with some of these other stances. So we have 3 wide receivers that we are higher on than market. These guys all have ADPs within the top 40, but 3 guys that we're higher on. Rashee Rice, we have a little bit of a stance on, not massive, but we're 4.6 spots ahead of ADP on. We also have Tank Dell, who we are 9 spots ahead of ADP on. And then Jaylen Waddle, we're also 9 spots ahead of ADP on. And
Keenan Allen as well.
And Keenan Allen, that's another good one. We're 11 spots ahead of ADP on him as well. So thoughts on this group kind of in that like end of round 2, round 3 range where we're taking a stance on these wide receivers.
I feel really good about these, especially. So I was, Rashee Rice is really weird. He's actually kind of in the sort of way where we talk about Devon Achane. There are very few players that really look like Rashee Rice did this past year. I think he had a 5.2 ADOT in the regular season. That was the lowest since Jarvis Landry, I think in 2014. Yet he had the second highest yards after the catch per reception that PFF has ever tracked. I think their data is like 17 years old now. He doesn't really like a guy with a 5.2 ADOT doesn't look like a fantasy wide receiver 1, but a guy who's elite after the catch. And not only that, but like we also see some Zay Flowers sort of scheme stuff. We're like, wish we pushed the ball down the field more. But Rashee Rice was elite efficiency wise too. He wasn't just compiling. He was elite efficiency, elite after the catch, earned a very meaningful percent of his team's targets, and he plays with Patrick Mahomes, and he's entering a second year. Like we talk about Achane, like, oh, how worried can you be when we know Achane is a superstar? I don't know if we know Rashee Rice is a superstar, but we know relative to the talent on his team, he is so much better than every one of these guys. How worried can we be about his ADOT when he is a target hog for Patrick Mahomes? Like, I'm just not going to be that worried. He has one red flag. He does not move the ball downfield. I'm willing to not write off that red flag, but I'm willing to say, like, it's a red flag in a sea of other green flags. I'm going to generally go with the sea of green flags.
The Rashee Rice bet as well strikes me as like a classic year 2 breakout bet in a way that may seem off to hear that because like he kind of broke out as a rookie. But when you look at his first read targets per route, he was at 14% this past year. That's not high. The guys like AJ Brown and some of the kind of the first read dominators, they're like up in the like 21, 22% range. That 14% range is like Jerry Jeudy was at 15%. So it's not particularly impressive. It's not bad. And it's part of the reason that he was able to break out as a rookie, is that he became a big enough piece of the offense in terms of like the play calling, right? But when you say that Rashee Rice was earning a lot of targets, I think that he was literally earning those targets. Again, that's one reason why I think the ADOT was low, is that like he's kind of that outlet guy for Mahomes as he scrambled around looking for guys. Oh God, the primary read hasn't gotten open. Travis
it's been
Kelce
5
potentially.
seconds. MVS still isn't open. What do I do? What do
I do? Here's Rashee Rice. Or Travis Kelce's getting doubled and he's not beating those doubles, whatever. Here's Rashee Rice. So I think you were getting a fair amount of that from Rashee Rice as a rookie. One thing that I look for is guys that are overperforming what you would expect based on their first reads, because as long as they're getting sufficient first reads, sufficient targets, they're a big enough piece of the team's offense to begin with, that's a spot in the next year. Teams are reviewing the tape and they're like, oh, maybe we should call plays with Rashee Rice as the first read a little bit more often. That's actually something I think that can boost for him. And maybe the end result is that he just kind of gets a similar role to what he had this year. But I think like it's not fragile. I think what he did as a rookie is not fragile. He can actually see an improvement in terms of how much the team is setting him up for targets. And he has the ability to earn targets from Mahomes even when he's not the first read on the play. He plays with Patrick Mahomes. Like, this is a pretty safe bet, I think, in the middle of the second round.
Yeah, I echo all those sentiments. And sometimes it does feel weird chasing like projectable volume because everyone else is bad. But this is like the best situation to do that. And we have a very strong rookie year with the opportunity to get better, as you just wonderfully articulated. And I think that the market will catch up. I think his ADP closes at anywhere from like 14 to 18 rather than towards the end of the second round.
Tank Dell, Jaylen Waddle, Keenan Allen were the other guys that we mentioned here. Waddle, I'll briefly say, just go look at his efficiency. I know it sucked last year. I know it's gonna suck this year when Tyreek Hill takes all the targets. But eventually, like, this guy's good, and contingent value is actually, I think, a thing here as well to consider. Like, if Hill were to miss time, like, Waddle could absolutely smash. But also, like, he's a really good receiver. He's in a good offense that values him. The quarterback play is sufficiently good. I think the single week ceiling is there. We kind of ran bad. We're going back to the well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As Sam Sherman said, Waddle probably led the league last year in games where he had some mysterious first half ailment that caused him to miss between 1 and 3 quarters of games. And I think that that's something, like, if you're testing, you're probably unlikely to assume that to be highly correlated in a player year over year. And it's probably more variance run bad. I think that the reasons Waddle underperformed last year don't justify an ADP in the 4th round this year for such a talented player in a friendly offense with extreme contingent upside. And it shocks me that the market has that one so wrong. It's rare that I think that they're just absolutely wrong. And I think that they're at least a round off on his ADP.
I think they are at least a round off as well. We have a cap on how much we can kind of jump above the ADP. Waddle is comfortably being hemmed in by that cap. Yeah. I mean, I would honestly take Waddle a few picks behind where I took him last year. I think he from the player showed us extreme efficiency again. So I'm not, like, I know the results weren't there, fantasy points per game and all that, but you got a young wide receiver who's like continually flashing in efficiency. I'm going to keep betting on that player. Tank Dell, Keenan Allen, any thoughts there?
Now, these ones feel like more obvious. Like, turns out Tank Dell was really good last year and his quarterback's really good. And he's at worst the number 2 receiver on his team. Like, they just don't have a ton of other competition for targets. and he showed an extreme ability to earn targets. He also beat the allegations he had in college, which like, this guy is just so small. I'm not sure he can do it. He won as an intermediate to deep receiver on the outside as soon as he stepped into the NFL, like silenced any doubts we had on what his profile would translate to. Keenan Allen scores a lot of fantasy points. As it turns out, he scores way more than wide receiver, 18 of fantasy points. Not only showed no signs of slowing last year, like by some metrics, his best season. He's just still really freaking good.
Yep.
Yeah. On the Allen front, we had a decent conversation just looking at his contract and thinking, what is the likelihood he gets cut? Because if Keenan is not a Charger, the ADP of 38.7 makes more sense. And he would obviously be lower than that. But we came to the conclusion that it's extremely unlikely. They have cuttable players in Mike Williams at the exact same position, who's not young in the tooth, coming off a torn ACL, and a worse player. And they have cuttable defensive players, Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and one of the Kendricks brothers, the one that didn't do insider trading, I believe. And
Eric.
Yeah.
That's true. Eric was not involved in insider trading.
Yeah. So Keenan Allen, if you were told he is a Charger, he should probably be close to the 2-3 turn, which is how we're trying to play him and hoping that in the 95% of outcomes where he remains on the Chargers, which he said at the Pro Bowl, I have no plans on leaving, which is something that you'd ideally like to hear from your players about whether they'll be cut.
Yeah, and we looked at the contract. He's due $18 million plus a $5 million roster bonus, which, so that's 23 mil. He's worth that. It's possible that they try to get him to take a pay cut or something, and maybe he's willing to, which is why he's saying I'm not going anywhere. I don't know. But also, like, if he played hardball, like they probably need to back down because they cannot go into this season with Mike Williams coming off an ACL and Quentin Johnston and whatever else they draft. But yeah, the connection with Herbert is so awesome. So I was a little bit nervous about him, but you guys kind of talked me off that concern a little bit. Cooper Kupp, Amari Cooper, and actually Terry McLaurin and DeAndre Hopkins are guys that we're higher on here. Not like the typical thing for us, I would say, like the kind of the maybe dusty vet group, and we're higher on all of them. All the guys I just mentioned. Kupp were 10 spots higher on, Cooper 9. Who did I say? Oh, McLaurin 7.5.
I think maybe with the exception of McLaurin, all these guys like balled out as wide receiver ones last year. Like DeAndre Hopkins dominated the targets. I get he didn't have a lot of competition, but his team still clearly viewed him as like, oh, this guy is the only player we should ever throw the football to. Cooper Kupp, he was at worst a 1B sounds like, oh, he's maybe the second receiver. His numbers are that of a number one on any other team. They throw the ball to two players. He's one of the two. And Amari Cooper, like true stud number one receiver. They all have their warts, but sort of like Keenan Allen, they showed us no reason not to believe in them as talents. Like once they start getting older, you understandably say like, oh, well, if there's a reason to think maybe the cliff is coming, I'm totally willing to get out a year early. I haven't seen that with really any of these guys. Like maybe you could say the fact that someone else emerged in Cooper Kupp's absence and then stuck when he was back is a reason to be a little skeptical, but like the market is very skeptical.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Hopkins is the one that I am like sort of the most surprised at how low he is. Like he was pretty good last year, and they just brought in a new head coach who's going to be, I think, much more aggressive in how much they pass. So, and like Burks heading into last year is like, well, Burks might be a competition. Well, Burks bombed. They don't have anybody else there. And he spent the entire year dominating targets, including from Will Levis. So I don't know. I mean, Hopkins is not someone you feel like is going to absolutely smash and be like, but as part of assembling a portfolio of bets where you're getting enough correct, he's sort of an easy one at this ADP to me, where it's like, I'm going to have, you kind of get in like a 5th round value, but he goes, he's going to pick 82. So I don't know. I'm a little surprised that there's not more interest in a guy who, And honestly, maybe this is just the time of year. Like, he's going to project really well, but we don't really have, this isn't projection season. But when we get to May and June, when there's actually really good projections out, I mean, Hopkins is going to project awesome, almost no matter how they play the offseason, because you're getting that boost in terms of overall passing attempts that will help alleviate any concerns about additional target competition, unless they like sign like a really big name guy.
Yeah, and on Hopkins, I think a really nice comp is Mike Evans from last year, where every possible red flag was not about the talent of the player. And when we're almost certainly confident in the talent of the player in the 7-8 turn at this point, that's an outrageous ADP. In their new head coach, Brian Callahan's opening press conference, when he was asked about translating what he did with Burrow and the Bengals offense, he said, well, we did that because it worked within the context of that offense. So it seems like at least he's saying the right things about maximizing the talent he has, rather than having one archaic system that he'll force his new pieces into, which is something you always like to hear. And I mean, DeAndre Hopkins going behind Jackson Smith-Njigba at this point in time by 25 picks, if my math is correct. When we do projections, if anyone projects JSN to outproduce DeAndre Hopkins, they probably should stop being in the business of projections. And again, projections aren't the only reason to play this game. And a lot of our edges, I think, towards the end, divorced from
We're generally a fade projections crew, but that's because the market usually bakes in projections in a major way. And then we're kind of going more to the talent. But here you're getting to bet on the talent because the projections aren't baked in.
Yeah. DeAndre Hopkins, I don't know where our pure rank is, but he's probably one of the top 5 within the top 100 players where we think the market is woefully incorrect.
Yeah. I would say, the top non-rookies, I think Hopkins is the number 2 guy that we, in terms of like the ADP value, not the raw number of spots, but the ADP value that we're off, that we think the market is off on. He's the second. We're kind of the second biggest stance on Hopkins of all players. One thing I just want to note is that as you go through, you may see a fair amount of quarterbacks that we're ahead of market on. I think that's kind of a structural thing here, where quarterback is a position you need to take care of, or you're going to be hurting. I think there's not a ton of guys that you feel really good about late in the draft, because there's real job security issues for a number of guys who are going to project as starters or probably start, but we're not sure. So there's not like a ton of quarterback. There's not 32 quarterbacks worth taking. As you can see here, we've got Will Levis at quarterback 29. Bo Nix is quarterback 30. We'll get to the rookies, but that's it. We only have 32 quarterback ranked in total in the top 240. And you just get to the spot where like the job security for the end of the season, which again is what we're playing for, is so bad that I'm not even sure these guys are worth taking. Like Bryce Young, we have a quarterback 28 ahead of ADP because he's not going to get benched. Like it's like, hey, I know he's starting, so that's something, But this is the same way you would have taken Kenny Pickett last year, because it's like he's unlikely to get benched. Of course, he didn't play at the end of the year, but
the Mason Rudolph playoff.
Mason Rudolph, yeah. But we got Geno Smith below ADP because I think there's legitimate risk of them drafting a quarterback, and then that quarterback, not maybe even first round, but they're not tied to him after this year, so he could get benched for the last 2 or 3 games. That's a catastrophe, right? So that's the way we're thinking through quarterback. Baker Mayfield, I think, is maybe a little riskier for the end of the season than it might feel like right now, depending on how they play it in the draft.
Yeah, once we get contract information with Tampa, that'll be a big clue on Baker. Like if they give him
that's true
3-year, the Geno contract of last year, which I don't think is out of the realm of possibilities, then you'll feel good, just like last year. We thought
we would move him up if he gets that contract for sure.
But we'd love to know those contracts before we make the decision, and the market's allowing us to do that, and we can sort of take the players where we have the information available earlier.
Yeah. So in general, I don't think we need to get too much into the specifics of quarterback, but kind of in the range of guys who there's some exceptions, but generally we're going to be kind of higher in like the quarterback window. Sean Siegel's kind of traditional quarterback window. We're generally higher on the quarterbacks there. Let's talk some of these other stances. Let's talk tight end a little bit. Mark Andrews, we're ahead of ADP on. George Kittle, Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid. We're ahead of ADP on all of those veterans. Thoughts on any of those guys?
No, I think we nailed it. We nailed it. That's it.
Yeah, I think we've preached before the importance of difference-making weekly production because, again, you're not trying to win the first 14 weeks. You're trying to advance a team through the satellite structure into week 17, and you want guys that are meaningfully more capable of producing 20-plus point games if that's just your arbitrary number. So we want to be, probably as a general rule, slightly overweight on that cohort, and I think we're doing that. I think McBride's one that's ADP is going to rise as a young player. There'll be some Cardinals hype, especially if they get Marvin Harrison as just an offense you want to be in on.
That's interesting because like getting Marvin Harrison is sort of one of the risks with McBride, that he's not going to be a target dominator. But I kind of agree that if they get Harrison, all of a sudden people are going to be excited about the Cardinals. And then maybe his ADP rises.
Stacks. Yeah, they take Marvin mid-second, maybe. You've convinced me that that's how the market would react. And then you're looking at like mid-fifth round McBride feels pretty reasonable for how great he was at the end of last year. I mean, with how good he was, I'm not too concerned of him fading away, even with another awesome player. And that's just making, I think, the market, mostly rightfully bullish on that offense.
I've got one I'll throw out. We didn't mention it beforehand that Kittle, excluding his rookie season, his worst season in yards per out run was 2 years ago. His second worst was last year. His worst was 3 years ago. Like, maybe we're a little bit tied up on how good he was in 2018, 19, 20. He was a lot better those years. And not to say he's not great right now, but like aging tight end whose worst years have all
is 2.12 yards per out run right now.
Yeah, that's his worst. That's like his second worst year recently.
Okay, but that's really good.
It's a testament to, it was like top 5. I think it was like third or something. Like it was tied with McBride. But aging receiver who didn't earn quite the same target share we've seen in years past, aging tight end who, like, I don't want to say he's dropped off, but like compared to early season or early career George Kittle, he's not the same player. That's somewhat a testament to how good he used to be. He's not that guy anymore. I think I'd take McBride and maybe Kincaid over him. I'm arguing to move him like 3 or 4 spots down, but throw that one out there.
You know what? I was on the clock and I drafted, and I ended up taking McBride over him.
Also.
And we can still be 8 because, like you said, Kittle was really good last year. He's like a top 5 tight end. But like there was a time in my life where I was like, I'm going to be a contrarian and say he's better than Travis Kelce when Kelce is putting up historic numbers. Kelce's also fallen off, but I don't feel like I need to be as high as we are on him, and we can still be above ADP. That's my only quibble here.
See, the thing is, for me, I want to be in on Kittle, especially if I have 49ers stuff. He's a priority for me then. But I did just flip McBride over him. I think one of the things that's really nice about McBride is that with these elite tight ends, sometimes you're like Kittle would be kind of the poster boy for this, is that you're just hoping you get that major spike week. And if you do, like, holy crap, like it's gonna like single-handedly advance the team through one of the single weeks or potentially win you the final. But McBride still has a really nice ceiling, and if he's at all doing the target domination thing that he was last year, he's also just hitting your lineup really, really consistently. And so
that's
he allows
guys who see the ball a lot is they hit your lineup a lot, but they also have the chance to go for 12 catches. Like volume is both a ceiling and a floor metric essentially, and he's a really good volume earner.
Yeah.
The one more pro Kittle argument I would make with the Niners is eventually, I don't know if they're going to look at moving Ayuk now, but I believe he just played. He has his 5th-year option left and nothing else after. And it's I guess possible they look to tag him after, but if a team offers them a first round pick and this offseason, which I think is like a 5% to 10% outcome where they get that and make the trade. But in that world, Kittle becomes infinitely more valuable as he does during a regular season with the contingent injury to either Debo and Ayuk. So I think that's like one feather in Kittle's cap until we get to the NFL draft.
Yeah, and another reason to just always be looking to bet on talent, right? Because Kittle he's super talented. Maybe he's falling off a little, but when guys are super talented, the path is robust. You know, Breece Hall, right? Like we bet on Breece Hall in a big way. Rodgers tears his Achilles week 1, and he still gets there because he's super, super talented. You have to be right about the talent evaluation, but like bad players don't overcome that. Superstars overcome that. And so with Kittle, if you think he still is a superstar at the tight end position, you know, if Debo were to miss some time at the end of next year, if something happened with Ayuk, I think he's there. But, you know, if something were to happen that open up additional targets, if the defense takes a big step back and they just have to pass a lot more, right? There's sort of like kind of the chaos kind of works in your favor in some ways when you have a really talented player. By the way, the Sortino ratio concept is kind of what I was referring to a little bit with McBride. The concept that Sacrilegious laid out in a recent article on Legendary Upside. If you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, I would recommend checking out his article where he laid out this new floor ceiling combo metric. I'm going to share a chart here. Interestingly, George Kittle's Sortino ratio was actually a bit higher than McBride's, but McBride I took a major step forward.
I was going to say it's probably because the first 6 weeks of the season, McBride was a part-time player or whatever.
Yeah, that's got to be it. I would actually be curious what his was just down the back half, but yeah, he's kind of, when you get these guys who are in this range, you're getting guys that are hitting your lineup every week. Laporta, you know, Hawkinson before the injury, like they were hitting your lineup very consistently, but then they're also giving you the access to ceiling. So I think it is really nice to have that, and I think McBride is definitely a better bet than Kittle for that, and just a really good bet in general. All right. Any other, let's see, any other big stances we should cover? Do you guys have any thoughts on Andrews as I pull up some other stances that we have?
Feels like the market.
He's still pretty good.
Yeah, okay. Good player.
He's still pretty good.
He's still pretty good.
Rarely want to be underweight players when I'm that confident in the talent eval, but I don't think I'm going to be meaningfully different than the market this year.
A couple of guys that I'll note as players that I'm really targeting in drafts. Jaleel McLaughlin is one that I'm really interested in getting. You know, he's got an ADP of 163. I think he's more of like an early double digits round type of value. I think he's going to be pretty clearly the number 2 there. I think he's good. I'm not sure that the guy ahead of him is that good. So, you know, Javonte's fine, but could Jaleel take that job by the end of the year? I think he could. So I don't know. This one kind of feels like a layup to me. I've been kind of hammering Jaleel McLaughlin as a like that RB4, RB5 type of pick as I'm filling out my, usually hero running back or zero running back rooms. Any thoughts on him?
Yeah.
Do you think like P. Ryan's cut? Because unfortunately, P. Ryan graded really well in like yards per out run, even though it's not the most exciting pick. I think that's the only concerns, that they're just going to continue running this 3-man backfield. But Jaleel's really good. I don't want to say he's better than Javonte, but like it seems very possible that he's better than Javonte. Last year, Jaleel was 13th in PFF rushing grade, 8th in yards after contact per carry, 3rd in PFF receiving grade, and 6th in yards per route run. Like, he checks all the boxes for a good playmaker running back. And maybe Javonte comes back another year removed from the injury and starts to look like the player we thought he was. But right now, I don't know if he's that player. Samaje is a very serviceable, good pass catcher out of the backfield, but he doesn't offer anything between tackles. I think Jaleel's a really good pick. But
yeah, this reminds me a lot of our conversations around a different former undrafted running back of the Pittsburgh Steelers, where we didn't love their starter.
Okay. All right.
I'm checking the Samaje Perine contract first because that is an impediment that Jaylen
They can
Warren,
save $3 million by cutting him.
Yeah, I would be shocked if Perine was back on that contract given McLaughlin's emergence, but maybe they rework something. But it feels really wrong that you can take possibly the best running back on a backfield at pick 164. And even if the Perine impediment is there, he should probably be a 12th round pick. And if the Perine impediment is removed via a cut, it's probably close to a coin flip and saving $3 million, which is pretty meaningful at such a low money position like running back. So I would like slap the Kramer buy on Jaleel at this price.
Yeah, and we talked about the pure rank not always being like the real rank. That's because like there's not a reason to take Jaleel McLaughlin when he's at pick 163. Where we would actually like have him ranked. But I will share that the pure rank on him is pick 114. So we basically think he's a 10th round pick. That feels like very reasonable to me. He's a really good second year running back. I mean, maybe we don't know for sure he's really good, but he flashed some really, really good stuff. They seem to like him. The guys ahead of him are a cut candidate who's not very good. I mean, he's fine. Samaje Perine's fine, but he's a cut candidate. And Javonte Williams, who was, I would say, like always, we were like hoping he would kind of emerge as, a star, but he's never flashed star level efficiency. He's a great tackle breaker, but they didn't use him a ton around the goal line last year, weirdly. Coming off that knee injury, maybe he shows more this coming year. I hope he does, but this is one of those backfields is actually pretty up in the air. So, I'm not saying take Jaylen McLaughlin in the 10th round. He comes out here at pick 140. That is where I would actually take him. So
yeah, I feel like a lot of times when we get these quote ambiguous backfields, my general take is like, unless there's some player who's way more talented than the other players, let's just assume the market is overvaluing how random these running back touches can be. And that's probably true most of the times. Here, we can also take a bet on talent while also betting on the chaos of an NFL season. We're going to compound these bets that are typically good ones. We want to bet on good players, obviously, but we know that running back is such a fickle position that just a tweaked ankle from Javonte can mean Jaleel breaks out. Like, we get to make a lot of those bets at once for a way too cheap price, frankly.
Yep. Izzy Abanikanda is one that has I kind of keep seeing him in my rankings, and I've actually raised him up as I was drafting on these. It's just like, man, I like his chances of being the clear number 2 behind Breece. I like him a lot better than like Tank Bigsby. Those guys like Tank Bigsby. I'm not sure. He kind of lost. Like he entered last year as the clear number 2 and then like lost out, whereas Izzy was buried and then kind of became the clear number 2. They cut Michael Carter. They cut Dalvin Cook. Like, he looked good. There was times where he was getting used. Right in week 17, I think they were putting in Izzy at the end when the game was over, and it's like, this is nice. I'm happy to finally see some of this guy I touted, and then before he became a 0. But I really need more Breece. So can we get Breece back out there? But I think he kind of earned that role. Obviously, they could bring someone in, but there's a lot of uncertainty in a number of these backfields. And I actually feel fairly good about his chances of holding that number 2 spot. The other guy, he's kind of a fun young guy. Miles Sanders is a really gross version of this, but we are higher than ADP on Miles Sanders as Daniel Wentz said his name, but his contract keeps him on the team. So we're 34 spots ahead on Miles Sanders, but I think a pretty clear number 2, and you're hoping for a better offense, better coaching. Bryce Young doesn't look like an absolute disaster in his second year. And you get the contingent value with Miles Sanders. Weirdly, I think suddenly actually a decent pick as Chuba Hubbard now rightfully going well ahead of him.
Yeah, a lot of the thesis around Hubbard last year was just the contingent upside if the starter went down. You just have to reverse the names, but the proposition stays the same with Sanders. And again, it's not fun, but you know that he is like a human on their roster come week 1. That's probably
the case.
But like in these pre-draft contests, you're avoiding dead roster spots can be huge. If I had 34% AT Perry last year, and like he actually did stuff in the final 2 weeks. I think he had a big touchdown week 17 or 18. The last none of my teams made it there, but getting guys that have a role that you're nearly certain in is valuable. And Miles Sanders, as much as it like pains me to say, back up on the Panthers and the 0 RB candidate that we never thought we'd have.
A couple other guys to mention on the stances here. Josh Downs. We are substantially ahead of ADP on Josh Downs. I don't quite understand the market on this one with Josh Downs versus Michael Pittman. I think Downs like kind of ate into Pittman's role a little bit. It kind of towards the end of the season, it started to shift back towards Pittman. But Downs was a rookie and I think had a pretty impressive rookie season.
He also obliterated his knee in the middle of the season, an injury that supposedly happened in either training camp or maybe even earlier than that. I remember he had a week of full DMPs and they're like, buddy, you are still playing. And he didn't play many snaps, but like from that day onward, his numbers plummeted. He was always on the injury report. His route rate was never the same. And like logically flows that if you're like physically unable to practice and your team still throws you out there and you're barely able to play, I'm going to guess he was not right for the rest of his regular season. Before that, he had an elite rookie season going. So like, obviously I don't want to just completely throw out the data of the second half of the season. Say like, I know what happened. I can write it all off. We don't, but the logic flows that I want to discount his fall off in the second half of the season and give him a little more credit for the first half of the season in which he was truly elite. I think in his first 8 weeks, he had 40 catches, 473 yards, 2 touchdowns. Like think about if he had gone 80 for like 1,000 or 85 for 1,000 and a few scores, like we would be putting him way up the ranks. We'd be saying like, is he a breakout wide receiver 2 candidate?
Which I think he is. Like, so yeah. So, I mean, the other thing about Downs is he was the type of prospect that was tough because he did check a lot of boxes, you know, like early declare, breakout, but he's small and he's like a kind of more of a slot guy. So it's like, what's the upside? But we do need to consider that he was actually like a sneaky strong prospect. The draft capital wasn't ideal, but then he earns a role right away. He impresses. These are what breakouts generally look like. You know, I know he doesn't have the size that we're looking for. He didn't finish off the rookie season the way we would have liked, but I don't know. I'm pretty into Josh Downs. He would have to move up a lot before we'd stop being high on him. And then Michael Pittman we'll get to, but you know, I think I just want to play it through Downs right now. If you're feeling like I don't want to be out on the Colts offense, well, Richardson we're slightly ahead of ADP on, and then Downs would be the way to pair it, I think, just given the prices. Last guy on the stances, I will note we are still way above market on Jaylen Warren because that's just going to be the way it goes until they finally let Najee Harris walk after his rookie deal expires. And then maybe we'll be even with ADP when people are drafting him as a 4th round type running back or something. But yeah, we're still high on Jaylen Warren. We are not fading Najee in a big way. We're actually 1.6 spots ahead of ADP on Najee here. I mean, this is kind of like we actually would have had him ranked above this, or did have him ranked above this last year, but this feels much more in line with what you're getting from Najee Harris. So I think, yeah, great. If he's going to go here, he's actually like a pretty good pick, or at least a very, very defensible pick. but Jaylen Warren we're still high on. Brian Robinson Jr., I'll also note, is the guy that I keep getting sucked in by a really efficient yards per route run. Kyle says he didn't run many routes. It's a fluke. He's a jag. So far, I'm refusing to budge. But
did I get you to move him down at any point? I was gonna say, I thought.
Yeah, you have. I've moved him down some.
Yeah, I like the range we have him in. I don't think he's a bad pick. Like, just a guy isn't like that's kind of a compliment. Like, there are a lot of guys who aren't even guys, and he's definitely like a top 25-ish between the tackles talent. There's never really been a good receiver, but last year, legitimately on a relatively small sample of routes, did flash a lot. I don't think that's going to be sticky in the end for his career, but like, it's not a bad bet to make, given that, like, you know, it was terrible last year. Tony Pollard, you know, who couldn't earn yards on a route to save his life? Najee Harris, like, you know, who could easily be replaced? Tajay Spears. Like, there are picks around him that have glaring flaws. Yeah. His glaring flaws that, like, what if his good stuff isn't sticky? That's not a bad flaw to have, frankly.
Yeah.
And he also has boosts coming his way. You know, Drake Maye likely going to be the quarterback that lands with the Commanders. I think he's a really strong prospect, and should be a big boost to the offense. He's on a rookie deal, so, you know, his status with the team is pretty set. Antonio Gibson is a free agent. That's in some ways bad, you know, because maybe they bring in another running back, but I think it's also possible they stick with Chris Rodriguez as the number 2, and if he could have a whole backfield to himself. So I think there's scenarios where Robinson ends up going in like the 5th round, and we have like none of him. Yeah, classic dead zone pick. We're completely out. One of our biggest fade stances in Best Ball Mania, but let's draft him now. And, you know, that's kind of my thoughts.
Yeah. Then looping back to Pittsburgh quickly, I think we identified this. I mean, if you want any coach to come in there and just have a muddied water backfield, boy, Arthur Smith as offensive coordinator does a great job in terms of being. It's going to be tough to predict who gets the work, but we're going to be reasonably confident that there's a very large pie of attempts devoted to the Pittsburgh running back room. And as long as like Godwin Igboeki isn't getting the goal line carries,
he will. You know he will.
One of Najee or Warren has the chance for such a meaningfully outsized positive outcome, especially if there's an injury to the other. And boy, it would be fun if it were Jaylen Warren, but I think it's decently likely it's Najee Harris as well. And
I do too.
You can get a decent share of both and have overweight positions and just say one of these could be a big win while the other's a small loss, or they're both small wins. I think it's tough for both to fail at the 7-8 turn in the 0 RB target area.
Yeah. They're both. It's exactly the range where they make sense, and I think you want to be taking both, which feels weird as someone who's, you know, been pretty out on Najee since I basically learned of him. I was like, I'm not really that into this guy, but now I think he's actually pretty well priced. Let's go to some of the fades. Let's start with a guy that we were really high on last year, burned us. Jonathan Taylor. We're now pretty far behind ADP on Jonathan Taylor, 9.3 spots behind ADP. Our kind of one big stand, we're a bit behind on Nico Collins. We're playing that more through Tank Dell. I do want to have some Nico, but you know, currently one of a fade. We can talk about him more in a minute, but Jonathan Taylor, we are pretty far behind on. We got him at pick 24. He's going at pick 15. Thoughts on him?
I don't want to trash Jonathan Taylor. It's like I do want to
you guys just said no, basically. There's just 5 seconds of silence. That's on my on Jonathan Taylor. No, we are not going on the record.
I want to be. I'm not going on the record with this conversation. I do want to be in on him, but like, it's been 3 years since he's been what we think of as Jonathan Taylor. And in a running back's career, as the NFL has literally told us through their spending of their capital, that's a lifetime. Like, if we didn't have such fond memories of him previously, we'd be saying like, oh, you know, his best season by far, like he hasn't even been close to where he was in 2021. Best season by far came 3 years ago, both as a receiver and as a, obviously, between the tackles runner. That's just a profile we've generally been very profitable in fading. I do think he could still burn us. But like, it's like the Adam Thielen bet. Like, most of the time when you talk about a guy who is past his prime, his efficiency numbers have dropped. And for running back, that happens so quickly. At receiver, it tends to happen a little bit older. They look like Allen Robinson, right? They don't look like Adam Thielen. That's a profitable bet. I could see a scenario in which Taylor buries me, but he would have to reclaim the sort of talent and efficiency of a player that has been a few years removed from us.
Yeah, and also the role is a little fragile with if Anthony Richardson's healthy, and even if the offense is good, a large portion of the goal line carries will go to Richardson. The receiving upside will be capped with such a mobile quarterback. So I think it's a bet that I don't necessarily want to fade, but when the market puts that running back in the top 15, it's really tough to pull the trigger when it's tough to envision the legendary upside of that player. And I'd rather take, one of the early second round wide receivers and a 6 through 8 round running back than take the Jonathan Taylor and then have to wish cast a Jackson Smith-Njigba. Or like the last year comparable that Pat gave was you take Tony Pollard in early round 2, and then you were taking Rashad Bateman or Treylon Burks, or even in a better outcome, Zay Flowers. But it's still tough to win that 2v2 when you're hitting on the wide receiver at the same place and then really nailing the running back.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that zero running back had such a strong year last year, is that the 2v2s, like, it doesn't really matter if the running back outscores the wide receiver, because you need more wide receivers in this format than running backs. And if you can get a wide receiver who's also, in a lot of cases was outscoring the running, Tony Pollard wasn't scoring that great. But then you go and you get a 7th round running back who's going to outscore Jahan Dotson by a lot of points, or whoever else, or Bateman or Burks, right? Guys that we were really high on because of me. Those running backs, it's like Rashad White versus Treylon Burks. Oof. Wait, you were on the Burks side? That's not good. And then you can pair that with the wide receiver scoring early. And maybe Olave kind of turns in a similar season. We don't feel that great about Olave, but if you're pairing that structurally with a running back hit in the 7th round, it's pretty powerful. And it's more powerful than pairing Taylor with that running back hit, probably, unless you structure the team very specifically, which you can do, obviously. There are ways to draft running back early and build really, really strong teams. But that's kind of generally, I think, one reason to be a little bit out on Taylor. I think, a lot of the red flags that we would talk about with Taylor would be things that we would talk about last year as well. But I think the issue is that, like, heading into last year, we had some of the same red flags, but we didn't have him turn in another poor yards per outrun season. He was at 0.86 last year. He was outplayed by Zach Moss for most of the year. We had Anthony Richardson look just as inaccurate as we were worried he would be, and kind of be reliant on rushing in a way that we assumed he would be, but then we got confirmation. So it's like all the red flags feel like more locked in, and I feel less confident about Taylor in terms of his ability to kind of overcome the situation. I feel more worried about his receiving, because early in his career, he was actually fairly efficient. Now we have 2 really inefficient seasons of receiving. So, and why is his price rising? His price is actually higher than it was, maybe not in the big board. Maybe in the big board he was going around this pick, but
he was going
even before the contract stuff, he was late 2nd round last year.
I think he opened in the 1st round last year, and I think for the big board was a 1st round pick, then was 1-2 turn and kept falling. And then before the contract stuff, he was a mid 2nd round pick. And again, we have more information to the negative than we do to the affirmative. And his price has went up even slightly. I think it's wrong. I think that eventually the market will come towards us on this. That's a pretty strong position. that I have. So I would feel comfortable waiting on Taylor and eventually getting him closer to the 2-3 turn if you want to get even.
Let's go to, let's see, another big fade position that we have. So we actually, I mean, I guess this is pretty on brand. We're pretty low on a bunch of running backs. I'll just rapid fire some of these running backs. Travis Etienne, we're quite a bit lower on. Isaiah Pacheco, Rachaad White, Saquon Barkley, we're extremely low on. Let's stop there and talk those guys, because that's kind of your dead zone running backs. But not all these guys are even going in the dead zone. Barkley is here at pick 21.6. We have him at pick 32. Pacheco, we're 12 spots behind ADP on. ETN, we're 12 spots behind ADP on. Rachaad White, we're 12 spots behind ADP on. So, yeah, I mean, I just think these guys, they do kind of feel like the classic dead zone guys, where it's like we're either not that confident about the receiving ability, like Pacheco. White, we think probably is. I don't think anyone would say he's like a good rusher. He's a pretty good receiver, but God, you're really praying status quo, maintains there. ETN, I think, really showed a lot of red flags last year in both receiving efficiency and rushing efficiency. Got there on some touchdown efficiency, which is like the thing I want to bet on the least. The offense, I feel a little bit shakier on. It feels weird to be like this low on ETN, given that he at one point looked like one of the biggest hits of 2023. But I don't know. Pick 31 just feels very bullish for a guy where I'm like, I don't really see the path to like a legendary season for him. And then Saquon, I just like fully do not understand. He is a free agent. Hasn't been like that good in years. And he's good, but he's not like a superstar level talent. Like, I mean, the efficiency, it does not back that up at all since basically his rookie year. And who knows where he's going to be. And even if he's on the Giants, maybe he doesn't get the massive workload.
Yeah, I was going to say if he's on the Giants, that's probably a negative, because the best case you're looking at, the season from before where it's fine efficiency on so much volume. But if you're praying for the volume, that's a very thin bet. It feels like an ADP of 2-3 years prior where it's that wrong. If he hits free agency, and Saquon's been very adamant he wants to be a Giant, I don't think that feeling is super reciprocated in the front office. It's very much present in the locker room with how the players revere him. But again, if they bring him back on a quasi team friendly deal, maybe 2 years, that's not that good for him. If he hits free agency, then maybe he hits a really good spot, but it also could be rough sledding for all these running backs in free agency. And I think he should be like a 4th round pick, probably. I think that's where we'd all say he should be.
Yeah, I have him.
Like, should we boost James Cook? Should we boost James Cook because he's such a good pick relative to the guys around him? Like, he's one of the guys I'm like, I could see how he beats me. He was really strong in the efficiency metrics on the ground, whereas like you said, Etienne was shockingly inefficient in the advanced metrics. Rashad White, less shocking, but also not efficient. Saquon feels like a bad pick. Pacheco, it's not terrible, but like I do not see a legendary season coming from this guy in the slightest. Like, Cook is maybe not a slam dunk pick as far as like pure ADP versus what we expect from him, but like I think he's a way better pick than any of the running backs that go around him.
Yeah, he's the least bad of them, and I think we'll probably be toying with the ranks as more drafting happens. Be like, hey, if no one's ever getting running backs until the Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren tier, that's something that has to be changed internally to match that. But if we're seeing bad ADPs, I think our primary goal is to point those out and say, we think this is inefficient.
Yeah, Cook comes. I mean, the efficiency for him is very good, and it is a bit binary with him. Where like if he just gets goal line work, he's gonna crush. So actually, I'm fine moving him up. I think I'm just gonna go ahead and move him up. Where would you guys? Where like if I put him, let's say at like 31 or 32 in the pure rank, would that be too high now?
Yeah. No, sorry. Earlier we were talking
that's
about,
good.
who would we take over DK Metcalf? Because initially we had him a bit higher and trying to bring that more down to earth. I'd probably take James Cook ahead of DK Metcalf. And I really like that the market isn't forcing my hand there.
Yeah. Okay. So what you're looking at will not be what you're looking at when these launch, because we're moving James Cook up. He comes out at pick 32 now. So we're going to have a bull stance on James. I like that. Like I feel good about in the efficiency stuff that I have. He comes out pretty strong as a rusher and receiver. And it's really just a matter of the goal line work, which obviously he's particularly in trouble there because Josh Allen steals so much. And then they just spent a whole season giving it to like anybody but him. So he probably doesn't get there, but I think he can pay off this ADP. It can come close to paying off the ADP.
Yeah, he can survive. He can survive. Like, imagine
he can survive it.
Especially think about how last year played out, where this ended up being a terrible range for wide receivers and running backs too. Like, he can just pay off by being a efficient runner, an efficient pass catcher, and having some touchdowns. He doesn't need a lot. He can survive it. It's probably one where you're like, there was a breakout receiver I missed out on. Or, Josh Allen turned in, or Mahomes turned in a rebound season. But like, the bad outcomes for him are probably okay. They're probably fine. And the good outcomes for him, like you said, are incredible. So he feels like a very big, small loss, but potential for a massive win type of bet.
Yeah, and we mentioned the Josh Allen goal line as an issue, and I think that's the only major non-comp with looking at how ETN was perceived last year on the Jaguars and James Cook this year with if they can get the goal line work, there's going to be such a path to the legendary season existing in their range of outcomes. And ETN was someone that we were pretty aggressive on at first in the late third, then especially as he fell to the fourth. And James Cook opens in the early fourth. I think he will get into the third. So he's someone that I would really be aggressive with now as a clear talent buy.
Yeah, 1.22 yards per route run as a rookie, 1.38 last year for James Cook. Those are pretty good numbers. They're not like off the charts. But when you pair that with really strong rushing efficiency last year, including, by the way, a really good success rate, which makes me a little bit more bullish about the idea that he could get some work around the goal line, because success rate is like you're doing what you're supposed to do. You're hitting the right hole. You're not trying to bounce everything outside, right? Those are players that, even if they're undersized, might be pretty good around the goal line. Like, give this dude a chance at the goal line, and maybe he actually surprises and, is able to earn a bit more of that work. And it's so binary. Like, if he's just used at the goal line, like, this dude could absolutely be like a week in, week out, like locked in starter in fantasy. It's just like, we're all basically just going to argue about like how likely that is. Any thoughts on ETN? I mean, I would say of the bear stances, this one makes me the most uncomfortable, but he kind of struggled in some of the advanced rushing stats last year after looking like a really strong rusher before that. I mean, he had minus 77 rush yards over expected last year. So he was quite inefficient as a rusher. That was behind Ezekiel Elliott. It was behind DeAndre Swift, behind A.J. Dillon, behind Tyler Algier, Miles Sanders. I mean, some of this because he totaled a lot of carries and then they was bad. But his rush yards over expected was minus 0.29, which is also pretty bad. So that's like, I mean, again, that's also behind Swift. That's behind where Eckler was last year. That's behind Alexander Madison. I don't think people realize like how inefficient he was as a rusher because he scored 11 touchdowns as a rusher.
Yeah, it's a stance that I fully understand. Think I will probably have in my portfolio if he stays in the mid-third, but it's, I think, more uncomfortable than Rachaad White and Isaiah Pacheco, who profile as such typical dead zone backs that I'm comfortable fading year in and year out.
Yeah, I'll probably move him up a few spots just because it's like he doesn't strike me as like a mega fade candidate. It's just that the market got really bullish on him after bearish info is kind of how I view it. And that makes it hard to stay close to the market.
We do have evidence that he's a good rusher. Not last year, 2 years ago now. was
2 years ago,
very
he's pretty
strong in
good.
the advanced stuff. So like, I don't say last year could have been a blip, but the answer is probably somewhere in between. Like we should weight more data more heavily, but we shouldn't take it as gospel that last year is who he is. So I still think I'm going to end up having less than the field on him, but I agree with you guys that like maybe not a mega fade candidate.
Yeah. I'm going to move him up a bit. Okay. So let's move to a few of the other big fade positions. Let's see. So we kind of talked this group of running backs. The easiest thing is to go look at more running backs. I mean, we're low on, I would say, the running backs with uncertain futures generally. We're not low on Aaron Jones, who is kind of fits that older running back who could fall off. But we are low on guys where we don't know where they're going to play next year. Josh Jacobs, Alvin Kamara is a cut candidate. They are in salary cap hell. Maybe they're going to clear cap space by restructuring Carr, and maybe they use that to keep Kamara. Probably better uses of that cap space, but Kamara was actually pretty solid last year. Derrick Henry, free agent. Austin Eckler, cut candidate. Nick
Eckler's
Chubb.
Sorry to correct, Eckler's a free agent. And
he's a free agent. You're right.
He's done in LA.
Yeah, sorry. He's a free agent. Joe Mixon, cut candidate, but I think a fairly, he could take a pay cut, and he's only making, I think, like $8 million. So I think he's somewhat likely to stay in Cincinnati, and we're not low on him. Nick Chubb, we are low on, primarily because of the injury stuff. But thoughts on this group of running backs we're generally low on?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the pretty common characteristics among all of them where we don't know where they'll be playing next year. Some more confident, some we truly have zero idea. Like none of them coming off of like anything close to their best seasons. Like Derrick Henry was good last year, but he probably wasn't he definitely was not peak Derrick Henry. Austin Eckler's fall off as a runner just seemed to continue and exacerbate last year. Nick Chubb is just injury related, obviously, but there is contract stuff that gets folded into that as well. Like another one where you look at the archetype players these are, and it's generally been winning bets. You can maybe quibble with like, oh, Aaron Jones was efficient last year, or I think so-and-so's got a better projection in terms of.
Well, you don't have to quibble with us there. We are acknowledged. Yeah. Aaron Jones is under contract with Green Bay. AJ Dillon's a free agent, and he was good last year. We're 4.6 spots ahead of ADP. We don't hate all old running backs. We're willing to take them if the price is right.
Yep.
This, I think, is a reasonable price for Aaron Jones, especially because we feel pretty good about the offense. This offense is actually kind of exciting now.
Yeah, and I think AJ Dillon's a free agent too, if I remember.
He is, yeah. AJ Dillon's a free agent.
So it's kind of all lines up for him. Like you're just kind of sweating the fact that he's old and can't stay healthy, but he still seems good. He's still under contract. The offense seems good. He checks a lot of the boxes that the guys who are in this range in our rankings check almost none of. And that's obviously why he's the one guy in this cohort who we actually like.
Yeah, Tony Pollard would be, to me, the most confounding of these guys, because he was so bad last year. The situation broke perfectly. And I don't know that I would want Tony Pollard in the current situation at this ADP at 74.5. Like, if you just told me they franchise tagged him again, shockingly, like, I don't know that I would take him. Like, I guess I probably should, because it's like I'm getting so many touches at the end of the 7th round or whatever, or the end of the 6th round. Then, I can use that. I can use is an advanced rate kind of piece just to help me fill out my running back room. I'll go maybe more aggressive with some of my running back breakout bets later.
Yeah,
but that hasn't happened. He potentially isn't in Dallas. Like, I don't understand.
And importantly, won't be in Dallas in the situation where they want him to assume the carries, because they just watched a season of Tony Pollard assuming all the workload, and they are going to find better options or just bring in competition, because there's no chance they're giving him anything more than $4 million to come in to be part of that group. And if Tony Pollard's on the open market at this stage of his career, I struggle to see a team being willing to give him the opportunity to step into a lead workload. He could be a committee back, and his ADP would then correct, and then he might be an interesting pick. But this ADP does not reflect that world.
Would you guys be shocked if he like went full Damian Harris and would just like signed a cheap contract? We assumed he was the number 2, and then we basically forgot he existed by the end of 2023, or the end of 2024. Sorry.
No.
Surprised, yes, but like stunned, no. Like James Robinson's another great example of a guy who's really good early in his career. It went quicker. The snap happened quicker, but like it's really good early, and the injuries just caught up to him. Like the position is just physically brutal. So no, not shocked.
2025 DC Defenders most valuable player, Tony Pollard.
That's fair,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's not the most likely outcome, but it's like it's a lot of risk and not a ton of upside, I don't think, with Tony Pollard right here. Like
I think the bull case is that he was hurt last year. What did he suffer? Like a high ankle sprain and a fractured ankle? I maybe am butchering that.
No, I think he did have a fractured ankle that he was coming back from.
And I believe it was also a high ankle sprain. Not that one, like that should be resolved by then, but like serious injury. And he started to look better down the stretch. But like he was nowhere near our hero Tony Pollard that we knew. It was just he was a little better. If you carry that sort of trend line back to another offseason removed from the injury and he comes back, his expected points last year were great. His domination of the backfield was great, especially when you throw out garbage time, of which Dallas had a lot of, in a number of different ways they got to garbage time. If he comes back as some semblance of old Tony Pollard in this role, he crushes. But like that's a bet that not a lot of running backs are able to make. Like it's not like we see this a ton of times. Like guys at the running back position, typically when we see them fall off, there's no late career revival.
Yeah, and I would say, if the Cowboys give him another contract, if they're like confident, if everything breaks right, then we'll still probably be behind market because I think this ADP kind of reflects that outcome already. But, at that point, then I would start to feel more open to the idea that it was just injury related. Like the team that saw it all go down feels confident that there's more there. If they don't feel confident, I'm worried the rest of the league is not going to feel confident. And then there's like a lot of downside. So this rank could be really off and we could be far too low on Tony Pollard. But I think like we'll get additional bullish information. And it's one where I'm willing to miss out in this tournament and then maybe get some more Tony Pollard later on, with the idea that I think the floor here is really low. Like this is a guy who got his shot and bombed. And that doesn't generally work out very well when you're a free agent the year after that happens. A couple more before we get to rookie conversation. Excuse me. I did want to talk about other guys who are free agents that I don't think people are like fully baking in. DeAndre Swift is one. Swift is a free agent, I believe, and was bad this past year. So he's I think a fairly easy fade. Thoughts on him?
I mean, you laid it out. Like he didn't add a ton to this team, especially down the stretch. Like he popped early, but like it's very clear that he wasn't adding a ton that they couldn't get from other players. Like we saw how they elevated Miles Sanders, right? Sanders looked pretty good in this system. Then he leaves and like, oh, it's clearly he was gaining a lot and actually wasn't offering that much. My bet is that Swift is the same kind of guy. I don't know how much they even care to bring that kind of guy back. If they did bring him back, would we draft him? If we knew he was on the roster, he was locked in $20 million and it was all guaranteed, there's no way to get rid of him, I'd maybe have him like 6 running back spots higher. He'd be a fine pick, but like they'd still be a candidate to draft a running back. They'd still be a candidate to give Kenny Gainwell more work. Like,
yeah, locked in, I think maybe
Dave
more
Montgomery
like
feels like
in the
fair,
late
right?
80s. Yeah. Around David Montgomery. Yeah.
That's not that much higher than where he's at right now, in which I think he's a dog to return to this roster. Kind of a big dog to return.
And the market's absolutely not factoring that in because they just saw DeAndre Swift in an Eagles uniform last year. So why would DeAndre Swift not be in an Eagles uniform the next year? And I think The market generally tends to overvalue the situation that we saw last year, especially when we know these are changing situations with free agents.
And he was a guy that his team fully gave up on. They traded, a day 3 pick for him. He is an unrestricted free agent after the year. I mean, this is a kind of classic guy who we always forget about, like how many players like we've completely wiped from our brains. And DeAndre Swift is a candidate to be someone we like completely forget about after this coming year. So again, that may not happen, and hopefully it doesn't, but it's a real risk. And I think one reason to be okay missing out on like I'd rather miss out on DeAndre Swift re-signing with the Eagles, getting a little bit of a discount there. I missed out on that discount. That's fine to me because I don't think Swift's that good. So like, what's he even is he going to bury me because I didn't get, pick 100 DeAndre Swift? Like, I don't think he is. I'm willing to make that bet that he won't.
And then just 2 spots lower, we have TJ Hawkinson, another player where, given his multi-ligament tear and an ACL surgery that he had 6 days ago, it is almost certain that he'll be on the PUP list missing the first half of the year. And just like we saw with Kyler Murray last year, when we have the information, it's not telegraphed, but there are some signs telling us TJ Hawkinson's probably missing most of this year, though he will be back in the important weeks, which is ultimately the highest consideration. But with Kyler Murray, he went from a 12th or 13th round pick to, in the final week of Best Ball Mania, fully undrafted, despite the situation not actually changing. It seems that we can be on a similar trajectory with TJ Hawkinson. So we made the decision that for a portfolio approach, it seems advisable to want to fade him in the top 100, as you'll almost certainly be able to get cheaper or equal priced Hawkinson in the future.
Once already known facts become sort of like unavoidable to look at, that's all that's going to happen. It's not new information. We're not even like speculating, like things that like the injury timeline that experts are putting out there basically like occurs, then his price will drop, we think. Some other cut candidates, Mike Williams is a cut candidate. We're well below ADP on him. We are, let's see, there's another one I just had. James Conner, we're lower on. He's a cut candidate. He's probably there, but the age is also a concern as well. Nick Chubb, I'll mention, could be cut. Probably not.
That would be
such a bad
locker room.
Yeah, it'd be such a bad look. But he's not protected by the contract in addition to the injury. I agree, though. I think he's probably there. One guy before we move to the rookies, and maybe a good little transition to the rookies. Oh, Devin Singletary is a free agent, by the way. So before we get too excited about what he did with the Texans, he might not be there. But kind of transitioning to the rookies here, Jackson Smith-Njigba we're behind ADP on fairly significantly. Did not have an efficient rookie season. Struggled to kind of earn like a regular kind of traditional wide receiver role early in the year. Got there by the end of the year. But, there are, I think, some reasons to be bullish. Tyler Lockett probably gone. And so then he assumes the number 2 role there. Maybe they are a little bit more pass heavy potentially, depending on who they hire as their OC. But we got a guy who had 1.32 yards per route run. I think kind of brought additional concern to the table in terms of the archetype, where he had a 6.4 ADOT, 69% of his snaps were out of the slot, not like the highest upside profile, quarterback uncertainty potentially, like he could have a rookie quarterback down the stretch, which obviously is not ideal. Or he could have Geno, but Geno's not like a star. So I think a little bit of concern there, like some real red flags. And he's basically going where he went last year. And I think one of the big things for me is, his ADP is 58.7. Like it's like the same ADP as last season. With rookies, we get this late season boost that's sort of built in, where we can really expect that the teams are auditioning them, seeing what they have, like they did with Jackson Smith-Njigba at the end of last season, we're very likely to get that boost. Even if they ultimately go down as a bust, they can still, deliver that late season production for us. Second year players aren't really necessarily going to do that. They're kind of going to be more what they are the whole year. So it's odd to me that his ADP is where it was last year, given, not a reason that we need to give up on him, but the rookie season wasn't that good.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think his ADP is off by 15 to 20 picks, which in the top 100 is something that is absolutely worth. The one issue is we're discussing pre-show. We think his ADP is not really likely to come in our favor as much as some of the others, because a lot of the second year bull or wide receiver frenzy for the young players, like Tim Robinson meme, we're all trying to find the guy who did this with Sky Moore last year. And some of those players, it's like you're looking at them. But JSN did nothing to make us believe he has a better range of outcomes on February 4th, 2024 than we had on August 28th, 2023. And the market is saying, oh, it's probably a pretty similar bet, when we think it is a meaningfully worse bet. Not a bet that is worth making 0% of the time, but at cost one that we want to make far less than the market is giving us.
Yep. Yeah, and so I'm still showing Swift on the screen here, but yeah, Jackson Smith-Njigba, we have at pick 65. He's going at pick 59. You'll see him fall to you with these rankings. You will not get 0 JSN. We're not making a hard stance. You can't draft him. We're just, feeling like he is overpriced. Let's get to some of the rookies. We're going to do this quickly. We've already gone a while here, and we're about to have a lot of rookie coverage on this channel, on the site. I'm gonna be doing a podcast shortly with Davis Maddock and Jacob Sanderson on dynasty stuff. We're going to talk rookies with those guys a lot this offseason. So there will be plenty of rookie discussion, so we can do this fairly quickly. We're even on Marvin Harrison. We're slightly ahead on Malik Neighbors. We're even on Roma Dunze. We're slightly ahead on Brian Thomas. I think Brock Bowers is somewhat significantly underrated, although I will say that the tight end market has me not hammering him. I think there's a lot of values at tight end, but I do think Brock Bowers is a fairly strong value. Caleb Williams, we're ahead of ADP on. I think he's obviously a very good prospect. Gonna very likely go number 1. Not a bad landing spot to the Bears. Troy Franklin. I would say we can stop here and talk about Troy Franklin and Jonathon Brooks are two guys that I am taking a lot of in these drafts. And then Keon Coleman is the first rookie we get to that we're not high on. So let's stop here and talk these 3 guys real quick. Troy Franklin, I think, has a good chance to go at the late first. One of these guys who could have a really nice landing spot as a result. He is, I think he's going to test really well. I think he's really fast. Downfield guy, 4-year player, but productive. So he's someone that I think ultimately will end up moving up in ADP is one reason to be high on him. But I also think, he's going to have draft capital behind him, very likely to be a round 2 pick if he doesn't go in the first. And again, could be a late first round pick in a great landing spot. Those guys tend to go more like 6th round, 7th round. So you're getting potentially a really big value on Troy Franklin.
That's kind of what I feel like with Jonathon Brooks, where whether or not I have a pretty high opinion of him, I think relative to the market, but even if you don't, think about the type of player that he is in terms of how the NFL is likely going to view him. I think he's a pretty good bet to be a day 2 pick. He's probably a solid bet to be the top running back off the board. Does that player typically go where the ADP has him right now? No, we hype that type of player up typically well before the draft, let alone after they find a landing spot. So one, I do think he's a good player, but even if you didn't, I think there's a very strong chance that I think it's almost certain that his ADP climbs. Not only does it climb, I think it climbs significantly.
Mm-hmm. I think Jonathon Brooks, is extremely undervalued. Now, he did tear his ACL. And that's one reason why I think maybe people are a little bit less excited about him, obviously. But from what I'm seeing, it seems like he's still going to be a second-round pick. It looks like it was a clean ACL tear. So, we would expect him to be kind of hitting his stride. I believe he tore the ACL in October or November. I can't remember. So he's more of a late season bet than the typical rookie. But all of these guys are late season bets, So like it robs you of part of the range of outcomes, and that's annoying. He's not going to come in and immediately dominate. But Jonathon Brooks emerging down the stretch and absolutely crushing is kind of the bet in the first place. I don't think the ACL injury really takes that away. And had he not torn the ACL, we're talking about a guy who I think is very, very likely to go in the second round. And we're talking about a guy that we normally take in the fourth round of best ball drafts. So he's a good rusher. He has good size. This is a really strong prospect. And the injury discount here seems kind of absurd. Pick 131. I think we should be taking this guy in the 7th round, honestly. So, we're, maybe I'm out over my skis with that, but we got him at pick 119, and I feel extremely confident that he's a good pick at pick 119. Extremely confident.
Mm-hmm.
Go. Did you have something in?
No, sorry. I had some stuff on some sophomore players, last year's rookies, but if there are any more rookies you want to dive into first, happy to talk about that.
We'll just say Keon Coleman is one that this one could look bad if he goes to the Chiefs or something, but I think one of the few wide receivers in this class where I feel genuinely kind of I'm not a huge fan. It kind of doesn't get separation. Not a super polished receiver, but draft capital could be there for him. We may have to move off this take. I would say in general, as we go through I'll get to one other take, but in general, the running back class it dries up quickly. I like Audric Estime a lot. I think he's kind of a fun downhill runner type, but there's not a lot of running back depth in this class. There's a ton of wide receiver depth in this class. You can kind of there's just a lot of wide receivers that you can take. And I would recommend using those extra rounds in the big board. They go 20 rounds instead of 18 to tack on some of these rookie wide receivers. There's big tiers here, big chunks of these wide receivers we have in the rankings. Jermaine Burton, very live, I think, to go second round. Looks like good day 2 bet. Ricky Pearsall could easily go in the second round. Kind of an arbitrage on Ladd McConkey. Roman Wilson just had a really strong Senior Bowl. There's a lot of these guys. Some of these guys are going to end up as day 3 dudes, and you're going to be bummed. So I would say spread it out a little bit. But I think you're going to end up potentially, if you're really high overall on the wide receivers, the rookie wide receiver class, you're going to end up on guys who have who go pick 40, and you're going to have shares of them in the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th round. It's a really interesting class that way. And yes, you are going to get guys who go in the 5th round, or even the 6th round is where you will get burned a little, but I think largely you'll be a winner if you take these guys. And also, if a guy's a 4th round pick, or 5th round pick, sometimes they surprise and get on the field at the end of the year anyway. So the cost is just really right on a lot of these rookie wide receivers, and in general, not on everyone, but in general, we're higher on the rookie wide receivers relative to the veterans in these late rounds.
Yeah, last year you had guys like Jonathan Mingo, Cedric Tillman, A.T. Perry, Tyler Scott, Marvin Mims available in the last round pretty readily. And by outcome, those weren't the best picks. But if you were looking at ADP, Mingo then went in the 11th or 12th round. You had Marvin Mims get up to the 11th round in the end. So you're going to be hitting some big wins, at least in terms of ADP, but also in terms of possible production, because draft capital can precede production. So you might swing and miss, but the veterans, you're also going to swing and miss, and they have far lower ceilings. So
one more rookie before we get to the sophomore thoughts to close it out. Drake Maye, I think, is like wildly undervalued. I think, you're seeing like I don't know if this is true as of today, but I was watching a YouTube video with Dane Brugler from The Athletic, and he had flipped Drake Maye to his quarterback 1. I think most people view it as a 1A, 1B. Drake Maye is really big. He runs a bit, not like a pure rusher, but if we're thinking of him, can he be like a Herbert? Yeah, he can be a Herbert. He's aggressive downfield. I think probably a lot more aggressive, like innately, than Herbert is a downfield passer. Had a really strong big time throw rate on 20+ yard throws. Really popped for me there. I think he's a very, very strong fantasy quarterback prospect. He's got size, he's got some rushing ability, and he's willing to attack downfield. That's generally how, we'd love if he was like super fast and ran all the time. But outside of that, this is kind of what we're looking for from guys who are going to produce fantasy points, can generate spike weeks. He's going to be the number 2 pick probably at worst. If he goes number 3 to New England, maybe I reconsider the stance. But I just think he's a really, really strong pick. Like pick 160, that's just way, way, way too low, I think. And he's one of the guys that we've actually raised the cap on in terms of what the ADP, like we're not allowing ADP to have as much of a say on Drake Maye. I just think he's just extremely undervalued. So he's boosted even beyond what most guys are. But any thoughts, Daniel, on some of the sophomore stuff before we get out of here?
Yeah, to try and close us out after Pat waxed poetic about a few promising players. I have 3 players who I think are like firmly do not draft players that our rankings are communicating as well. If we look firstly at rookie year running backs, 3rd round picks, fewer than 400 rushing yards in their rookie season. Team invests a lot and they get next to no production from them. We have in the past 10 or so years, Kendre Miller, Tank Bigsby, Tyrion Davis-Price, Trey Sermon, Keyshawn Vaughn, Lynn Bowden, Darrington Evans, Darrell Henderson, Damian Harris, Deonta Foreman, James Conner, CJ Prosise, Kenyon Drake, Tevin Coleman, Duke Johnson, Dree Archer, Charles Sims. An awful cohort to be placed in. And
James Conner, that was a nice name.
Yeah.
If a team committed to one of these guys, you'd be interested.
Yeah, if Alvin Kamara said, I'm holding out next year, and Jamal Williams also wasn't there, I'd be interested in Kendre Miller. But we don't have those exceptions. So that's a bad forest to be looking for the hits in. So I would not be taking Kendre Miller, even with the Kamara cut risk. I think these players are bad. If Kamara gets cut, I'll probably reconsider because then we have the meaningful situation outlier. But until we have that, I don't want to project it. Then at wide receiver, there are 2 when we're looking at 2nd round picks that started or played at least 10 games, fewer than 500 receiving yards in their rookie year. From this year, we had John Mechie, Marvin Mims, and Jonathan Mingo. And this list is Sky Moore, Tyquan Thornton, D. Eskridge, Rondale Moore, Terrace Marshall, Van Jefferson, KJ Hamler, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, Anthony Miller, Andy Isabella, James Washington, Dante Pettis, DJ Chark, Zay Jones, all from 2016 onward. So again, not a great group to be looking at. We were talking about Mims as a possible outlier with how unique his usage was. But again, there was probably something unique about almost every one of these very bad players. So Mingo, I think, is a clear fade.
On, man.
Mims, I can squint and justify taking, but I'd really like to just say he's in a group of terrible players. I think my null hypothesis, he too is a terrible player. And, we pushed Sky Moore in this terrible player bucket into the 9th round because it was like, well, he is Patrick Mahomes. And then with Marvin Mims, we're like, well, he's going to run so many routes this year.
We didn't chase him up until last year's 7th round. I'd like
we're just credit
for only being really, really, really wrong the first year and partially wrong last year.
Yeah, I think with Mims, we have all these fancy memories of how quote great he was, but you have to sort of treat his season holistically, especially since there wasn't any sort of catastrophic injury that plummeted his numbers. It was just his team continually deciding we shouldn't be putting him on the field that much.
Yeah.
when you look at his season holistically, just in terms of like raw production, he looks like Trey Palmer, Trey Tucker. Like he looks like guys who probably don't go drafted and they probably don't come close to going drafted in all drafts. Like Trey Tucker is literally, I think, our last player in 240 players ranked. Like if you zoom out far enough, you don't have to zoom out that far, frankly. Those are the guys he looks like, and that's probably what you should treat them like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's never a great sign when you're like, oh, sweet, Marvin Mims just caught something. And then you're like, oh, wait, that's little Jordan Humphrey. That's not super bullish for
Brandon Johnson.
Yeah. I mean, the guys they were playing over Mims or not. I mean, that is just a bad sign. I want to be back in on Mims. Mims, I thought, was so exciting early in the season on limited routes. But, yeah, it's given the quarterback uncertainty there as well. It's not a bet that makes a ton of sense right now. As much as I would like to go against what is prudent and draft him anyway, we are fairly significantly below ADP. We've got him at pick 161. His ADP is 149.4. But all right, I don't know why we closed on that. We closed on Marvin Mims is dead to us. That's the worst possible way we could have ended this podcast.
New year.
Thanks. New year. New takes. My highest drafted wide receiver is now a fade. Great.
I was going to say, folks, it's 2024. We think Najee's not a bad pick. Marvin Mims, junk ball. Don't put him on your team. New year, new us.
Not entirely. Breece Hall, baby. First round pick.
Amen, brother.
We're good on that. All right. Thank you guys so much. We will see everyone later with, as I mentioned, Dynasty content, rookie content, and just more best ball content rolling out on the site. Enjoy your drafts. Good luck. See you next time.